Peace and blessings, family. This is your brother, Asarimhotep, with the Martin Delaney Center for Egyptology. And today is Kujichagulia, aka Monday, July the 3rd, 2023. And we have another critique, or excuse me, how to critique the critique episode. And we will be reviewing some arguments made by Dr. Sandro Capo-Chichi in regards to Jean-Claude Mboli's work on the origin of African languages. This is the first in a series, so we have a lot to cover today. So I appreciate y'all for joining me, and we'll have all that and more in just a moment. And welcome to the Mbongi, and we are back. So just want to say welcome and thank you to all of you who are catching the show live, and then those, of course, of you who are catching the archives of the program. And so, as always, I like to start our conversation with a shout out to everyone who has made themselves known on the YouTube chat. And so, peace and love to Sister Mika. Always glad to have you here. Shout out to Mabanza Kimmit. It is in the building. Learn Together with Obama is in the building. And Anointed Sadat Amin Ray is in the building. Dijot is in the building, along with Tony Macaroni. And Tete Ursamaat Seneferu is in the building. Sister Regina Wilson is in the building. She asks, hi, what's happening here, please? I'll get more into that in just a moment, but thank you for joining the live. And our good brother, OG Gorilla, P. Kanman, Silverback, peace and blessings to you as well. And so shout out everyone who is watching live from Facebook, the asarimhotep Facebook page, as well as the asarimhotep Twitter channel. We are live on Twitter as well. So thank each and every one of you for joining this discussion. And we are going to get into it in just a moment. And so just want to send a reminder that we have on pre-sale, the upcoming book, Race and Identity in Ancient Egypt, Volume 1, Towards an Etymology of the Place Name Kemet. This is the first text in a 3-volume series, and it is currently on pre-sale right now, and it will be released on August the 22nd, so next month, towards the end of the month. So it is currently discounted. So the text will be $45 when it is released. So right now you can get it for $35. And so, on August 22nd, they will go out, and you will get your book hopefully by the end of the month, depending on where you're at in the world. And we will keep the conversation going. So it's available right now at asarimhotep.com. So when you go there, you don't have to put in a code now. It's just automatically discounted for those who go there. So uh, what is Sister Regina says, okay, thanks. And Brother Teti says, Asar about to light up some fireworks for the haters on YouTube. You know, we uh, got to keep it going. You know, peace and blessings to Sean P. and Brother Chavez, H Town in the building. And so yes. So, you know, as stated earlier, let me put back up the banner. Remove that comment so y'all could see. I'll remove that banner. Here we go. So this is the first of a series of critiques in our ongoing How to Critique the Critique series. And so, you know, in previous How to Critique the Critique episodes, we analyze critiques made by scholars concerning other scholars' work. And the aim and the objective for these kinds of series is to help the layperson to be able to analyze the critiques. Because what often happens in this social media, social space community is that, you know, is very prone to these ongoing debates about various subjects. And what tends to happen is that if somebody, person A, is in a disagreement with person B about some bit of information or scholarship, and let's say that uh, person B presents some information from a particular scholar to counter a debate or an argument with person A. Often what'll happen is person A will scour the net to look for an argument against person B's scholarship and try to weaponize that critique of person B's source material. However, that is not how scholarship is done. That is part of the literature review. However, you are supposed to be competent enough in the subject to be able to critique the critiquer. And so uh, many people feel that there is an argument against something by another scholar, and then because that person made a critique of that particular scholar's work, then that must mean that the conversation is done with, is over, you know. But that's not how this works. And so, in an ongoing effort to elevate the layperson's ability to analyze and critique scholarship, we have these little exercises, you know, and for how to do scholarship and how to analyze the data that is being presented to us. So, with that being said, in and this is almost a year ago that these particular critiques were made. And so, as you all know, and that's the reason for the upcoming book, I've been engaged in ongoing and endless debates on the etymology and meaning of the place name Kemet. And so, in part of my source material, uh, that, you know, for other types of arguments has been Jean-Claude Mboli's Origin of African Languages. And in that text, and it's really kind of irrelevant to the meaning of the place name Kemet argument, because my argument was made before Mboli's text was published in 2010. So I came to this conclusion way back in like 2008, 2009, in terms of the final meaning of what the word Kemet means. So it's independent of that, and I have to make that known because in one program, the host had made the argument that my argument was based on Mboli, and that is not the case at all. He's an independent person who came to the same conclusion as I did, which is one of the reasons why I cite him as one of many African scholars who have also come to the same conclusion regarding the meaning of the place name Kemet. So, um, so with Dr. Sandro Capo-Chichi, we have been engaged with this good brother for a number of years now, and both publicly and privately, in terms of uh, intense arguments about various different subjects. So by the time that this host, brother Smash Rockwell, Jonathan Owens, got word of Capo-Chichi, we've already engaged Capo-Chichi and debunked many of his arguments. But in the ongoing debates with myself and brother Jonathan Owens, he reached out to Capo-Chichi regarding I don't know what the specific initial inquiry was about, but uh, Capo-Chichi responded to Jonathan Owens with a 19-page PDF critiquing Jean-Claude Mboli's overall work, his 2010 book. And so the uh, this particular PDF was not shared with the public, and so we only got word of it because Jonathan Owens, that is, has done several shows, even more recently, where he is showing live on the screen the certain arguments and aspects of the document. And so since uh, the document is not public and we only have access to parts of it through Jonathan Owens uh, showing it on his own YouTube podcast, what I've done is I've taken some screenshots of some of the arguments, and I will be making these subsequent videos, uh, based upon the screenshots, and I make sure that I try to get the full argument, so it couldn't be argued that I'm taking anything out of context in terms of the critique. And so uh, with that being said, that should give you all a good background for what's to come. So some of these videos have already been recorded. um, I'm doing this one live because in my previous recording, for those who are part of my Patreon page, um, I came to a discovery and I wanted to explore it some more, and that is what I did, and I wanted to add that into the presentation, which I've done for you today. So y'all get some added bonus information that the Patreon members did not get already. So, but the subsequent ones after this will probably be pre-recorded and shown at different times until the book is published. Uh, that is, on August 22nd. So, so throughout July and August, be on the lookout for these for this series, specifically addressing Dr. Capo-Chichi. So, with that being said, I am now going to share my screen, and I don't have any audio to share. So we're just going to make that full screen and hide that. And we're going to do it like this. So hopefully each and every one of you can see uh, what is being shown here. And so we will get started. So again, how to critique the critique, Capo-Chichi on Jean-Claude Mboli. So if you don't know who Dr. Sandro Capo-Chichi is, he is a scholar, I believe, out of Benin, who got a degree in linguistics in 2019, I believe, and in Paris. And he's currently, or he has finished his secondary uh, PhD in art history. And so, and this has to be mentioned here that a layperson's mistake is thinking that because someone is knowledgeable in linguistics in general, that means they are very knowledgeable in all areas of linguistics. Linguistics is a very broad and all-encompassing field. There's specializations in different subfields within linguistics. And so the kind of linguistics that Jean-Claude Mboli does is a different type of linguistics than what Sandro Capo-Chichi does. So there are nuances and methods and things that Sandro Capo-Chichi has shown not to be very familiar with because that's not his area of study. But he does have a PhD in linguistics. So let's not get this confused. So he has a good grounding in the basics, but his strong hold is in a small pocket of languages, his native language being the Benin language, and the Ewe, Fon, and all that group down there, but in a present synchronic state. And so there's synchronic linguistics and there's diachronic linguistics. And diachronic linguistics is the study of languages over time and their evolution, whereas a synchronic language study is the study of a language only at a particular current state or a particular state in time. And so uh, the knowledge of how that particular language came to be, its relationship with other languages, and the proofs of those facts and things may not be known to a person who simply does synchronic linguistics, right? And so we want to lead there. So this is Dr. Capo-Chichi. This is from, I believe, the Harvard website, what you see on the screen here. And so here is the screenshot of the first critique, made that it's not the first critique made in the document, but it's the first one that we will address in the series. So at the top of the screen on the left-hand side, you can see a smaller screen-on-screen shot of Brother Jonathan, and he is showing the document here. So if you can see on your screen, okay, we'll just go here because I think it's readable here. So there's essentially two main critiques here. So there's in Jean-Claude Mboli's work, he is comparing, primarily 6 languages. There are other languages added later on, but primarily 6 languages: Middle Egyptian, Coptic, Hausa, Zande, Songo, and the Somali language. And the purpose of doing the vocabulary comparisons is to establish the patterns between the languages and to reconstruct the forms of the ancestral forms of the word, as well as the phonological system of the proto-language, which taken after Dr. Theophilo Benga is called Negro-Egyptian, which I call now Chiena Intu, right? So on pages 142 to 143, Jean-Claude Mboli does an analysis with a Egyptian word parat, meaning cake, and so we can just read what Capo-Chichi writes here. So he says, Mboli claims that Coptic pate, eggplant, is related to Middle Egyptian parit, or pot, how he pronounced it, cake, pancake, flatbread, sango para egg, zande para egg, hasa kwai egg, somali bead egg. Mboli claims that parat, cake, pancake, flatbread, actually means egg. He backs up his idea by claiming that in the pluralized form, the word patarut, where it is sometimes means offerings, the word is sometimes written with the determinative of the egg. Among many Black African peoples, such as the Zande, eggs are important offerings to the deities. And lastly, the Coptic word pait, eggplant, is related to Middle Egyptian paret, egg. Pat should be segmented as pai, egg, plus ta, plant, seed, plus Middle Egyptian e, adjectival suffix that evolved into e, or I, in Coptic, literally meaning vegetal egg, like in English eggplant, because of the physical resemblance between the egg and the eggplant. So this is essentially the argument or the statement made by Capo-Chichi regarding Mboli's work. And, this is something that I'm going to emphasize what I'm about to say, that is, moving forward in all of the critiques. Whenever you are critiquing anyone, you don't try to summarize their statements, especially if it is not an overall analysis like of a text or something like that. If there's a very specific argument, a very specific statement that is being addressed, you always quote the author so that the reader, can see the full context of the quote, of the critique itself. And then so when they go back into the original source material, they can verify, one, that you copied and the words correctly, and two, that you actually understood the essential argument that the original author was making. Because oftentimes, if you just summarize it without quoting the people directly, then you may misconstrue their arguments. And that is often the case here. So, this is Brother Jean-Claude Mboli, and to the left is his text, The Origin of African Languages, in French. And this is the information as printed in his particular text, starting on page 142, going into 143. So we're going to do what Capo-Chichi did not do, and it is quote him directly, right? And so, and to his credit, this isn't an Capo-Chichi's response is not necessarily an article, but it's 19 pages of critiques according to Jonathan Owens. And so, since this is an email response, there is some grace for him not quoting Jean-Claude Mboli directly. But regardless, when it comes to something like this, you always quote the author directly, because this is something that often happens in this community. They'll try to summarize and make arguments and end up putting words in people's mouths, and then they'll argue against the misunderstanding of the argument. And it's just ultimately a waste of time. So here we go. So this is what Jean-Claude Mboli wrote before. And so what we're addressing is correspondence number 2. And it is this word here, perit. Here's the hieroglyphs for it that you see my arrow circling. And this is, of course, the words in French in terms of cake, pancake, flatbread, or whatever. Here's the word for eggplant. Here's the Coptic and here's sango, para, and ouf is egg. So this is egg, 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 right? So this is his commentary. So what Jean-Claude Mboli will do is oftentimes when he is, and this is in his 2010 text, this text here, often what he will do is when he is making a correspondence like this, when he's doing his initial comparisons, he often, for some of the words, he puts a commentary to kind of go in depth about what he is saying here. So this is exactly what Jean-Claude Mboli has written. It's in French. And so what I've done for you, of course, is I've translated it into English. And so here is my rough translation. So what Jean-Claude Mboli states is that the identity between the Sango and Zande terms, let's go back here. So this is Sango and Zande, the word for egg, right? Terms can only be explained at first sight by a borrowing from one language to another, because Sango and Zande are relatively close in proximity in terms of speakers. So the first assumption is that it is a borrowing. Either the word is borrowed from Sango into Zande, or borrowed into Sango from Zande. So that's what he's trying to say here. So their connection with the Middle Egyptian term is not obvious at first. So what he's saying, how does the word for egg relate to a word for bread and pancake, right? But when you know that a pancake is generally whitish in color and has a round and even ovoid shape, as indicated by the very determinative of the word, there is no longer any doubt. Moreover, in the plural, this term is sometimes written with the determinative of the egg, the H8 sign of the gardener's list. So that's what you see in the original here. So this word for offerings, it has the egg symbol that you see right there where my mouse is circling, right over this circular. Sometimes is used to represent bread, and sometimes land, right? So one can even wonder if this is the case, not simply a question of eggs, because eggs and chickens are among the Zande and many other Negro African peoples the main elements of offerings to the gods. The following correspondence confirms that Per did designate the egg in Middle Egyptian or in Old Egyptian. The Coptic term, on the other hand, poses less of a problem if it is broken down into pai te, because the aubergine, or the eggplant, the one that is precisely the color of white, has a striking resemblance to an egg. As the English term eggplant, shows here. It now remains to explain the T part of the word in, pati or pate or pate, part of the word. This is indeed a Coptic term, ta, which means plant seed. Pate would therefore simply mean vegetable egg. The passage A to J being due to the addition of a vocalic adjectival suffix. It is certainly the Nisbe Middle Egyptian Y, Coptic E, which indeed gives IE to E form, right? So I know I read a lot. And so what he's saying here is that the word for bread and offerings ultimately derives from a word for egg, or there's a correspondence because of their shape, and that he argues that the word for egg, or the symbol for egg, was also pronounced per, right? Now, I don't necessarily find support for that, and so we'll get into that in just a moment. And then lastly, he's saying that the Coptic term, pate, can be broken up into two words. Now, this This latter part here, I'm just going to say from the beginning, and we'll see why later on. Jean-Claude Mboli is wrong. So this is a valid critique, that happens with the regarding the word pate, which we'll get into further below. But I'm going to show that essentially uh, Mboli is correct on the first part, and then I'm going to show why he's wrong on this last part here. So the first thing that should have been done is to, excuse me if you hear me drinking, is to go into the actual lexicon to see if Mboli was in fact correct. Now, Mboli doesn't do an extensive analysis of this term. So what I'm about to add in here is my verification of Mboli. So Mboli, the only critique on this part is Mboli didn't go far enough to prove this case. But what I know about the ancient Egyptian language and how its words are formed, you're going to be able to discern a pattern here. So remember, when we go back here, he talks about their connection in terms of the word for egg and for bread and pancake. Their connection with the Middle Egyptian term is not obvious at first sight, but when you know that a pancake is generally whitish in color and has a round and even ovoid shape, as indicated by the very determinant of the word, there is no longer any doubt. So I started looking at the various words for bread and things of that nature, and I started to notice that there were different suffixes to the root, and that there were other words in the language that has nothing to do with bread, but had a similar shape that that also had that first and second consonant in sequence. So let's take an analysis here. So we have this root here, per, meaning form, shape, original state, primal state of being. Notice that on the hieroglyph here, the determinative is of a circle. Now, why would a word for form, shape, original state, primal state of being have a circle as a classifier or a determinative? So we're going to pause, and keep that in mind. So when it talks about a form or a shape, it could originally be talking about a circular shape, right? And so then we have this word perej, a round cake. It has a j suffix to it. Do you have this word here, perut, offerings, cakes, loaves, food? Then you have this word here, perej again, this time a ball or a cone, incense. It's supposed to have in parentheses incense, right? And then we have, paret, an offering, a loaf. And now it has a different circular object, with a little square in it. It's supposed to be a symbol of a type of bread. It almost looks like, for those of you, especially from down south, have eaten those kind of Mexican breads, those Mexican sweet breads, these big round breads here, right? And then we had this word here, parut, again, offerings, cakes, loaves, food. Another, circular determinative here with a little, it's another loaf of bread in the center here. It's like a little circle here. You can't really see it. But this is also a symbol used in terms of bread, right? And then you have this word parik, a flat, thin cake or a biscuit. So you see this has a different suffix to it, right? Then we have perikuyut, a shell of a turtle, a skull, a flake of stone, a potsherd. And then it's repeated here. But notice that at the end of it, it has that same circle that you see in this word pa here. And in this other form here, you see the circle is a little bit larger here, but these are different, spellings of the same word here, right? And then you have Paratiyu, meaning the primeval gods, because the root here is from this form here, meaning primal state of being, the original state. And so again, when you, with the exception of the primeval gods, all of these different words here have to deal with some kind of circular and roundness to the object. When you think of a turtle shell or a human skull, and this flake of stone, I don't know if all the stone flakes were in circular forms, but similar shape, right? But all of these had these kind of ovoid type shapes. And to reinforce this notion, we have this other word that you see here at the bottom, peret, filled tubes. And again, that circular determinative at the end of the word here. So we can verify that this is the case here, that there's an underlying assumption that these words, and even the word for breads and loaves, because it's not just pawut, which you see right here. This is just one form of the word that you see in this row right here, but there's other forms of offering cakes and round cakes that just have a different suffix to it. So we know that what I have bolded and in red here is the actual root, which is further confirmed by this word at the bottom. And so, for those who have the Rainer Hanning Waterbush dictionary, you can see this form of the word right here, paru, that word that we talked about, original state. It's equivalent to the word tepu, meaning primordial shape, first past, or the beginning of history and the like. And then we have this variant right here, prehistoric times, right? And so notice again that this word has this circular determinative at the end. And so, for those who are unfamiliar with this aspect of historical comparative linguistics, this wasn't arbitrary in terms of why he was able to make those particular types of connections, because they were made by regular sound meaning correspondences. So I have recreated the table when Mboli was comparing the Middle Egyptian words that begin with P to the other 5 languages that he was, the Middle Egyptian words that started with P, he's comparing them now to other words in the data set to see what sounds correspond regularly with it. So as you can see in this chart here, where Middle Egyptian has P in the first consonant position, in the Songo language, for example, it corresponds to both P and the voiceless labiovelar sound P, which is represented by KP that you see in these words here. And like in this case for Middle Egyptian pasi to bake, and the Coptic is pika to bake, or pisa to bake, and in Sango is poro, meaning to boil, and in Zande is pasa, meaning to bake, and then hasa fasa, meaning to boil, and Somali bali, meaning to boil. So ultimately, if we was to reconstruct this word, it more than likely just meant to cook. And then over time, depending upon the language, it got more specific in terms of either baking food or boiling, in terms of water. But it has to deal with cooking with fire, basically, is what this how you would reconstruct this term, right? So you can see that in the Songo language, it's kpa in this position, and you can see that it has it in this word here, pale, calamity, which corresponds to zande, bere, calamity, and Somali, ba, calamity. You know, but I have here in the Middle Egyptian, and so this is something that you should know as well. That when we're doing historical comparative linguistics, we always want to have a minimum of 3 correspondences. So in this particular table, he has a total of, it looks like 7. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. No, 6. So 6 correspondences, and of course, where you see these little dashes, there's no supportive, word in that respective language. So it's 2 missing from Coptic, 1 missing from Middle Egyptian, 2 missing from Hausa, 1 missing from Songo. But this is normal when you're comparing a number of languages like this. So we're just going to focus on the ones that have the P and then the nasalized uvular trill, which is highlighted and bolded in blue. And so we can see in this first row here that in the Zande language, the nasalized uvular trill is dropped in the first word, but in the second word, the nasalized uvular trill is corresponding with the R sound in Zande. And this is confirmed when we go to Peret, cake, and then Zande, para, egg. And so this word right here, this paramount time that we have here in Middle Egyptian, and these words meaning first and precede and beginning and begin, all of this is going to be related to these words for egg and cake, as we're going to see later on. So I wanted to go further and show that because, since we only have 2 examples here of both consonants corresponding here, I wanted to but we have a number of course, the P's in the front in the first consonant position. I wanted to show that the nasalized uvular trill on the right hand on the second consonant position also corresponds to Zande R regularly. So here's some more words to confirm that this sound correspondence is in fact legit, right? And so I will leave that up there for now. And anybody want to challenge me on these correspondences, we can do that. But these sounds are valid. So the Zande is going to be very important for us. So we're going to go. So we know by regular sound correspondences that regardless, we know that the Middle Egyptian PR, or the PR, the nasalized uvular trill, is going to correspond to a PR in the Zande language because of the regular correspondences that we see in terms of the sounds here. So what Capo-Chichi doesn't really understand as well is that, and he didn't show this in his document for what's his name, Jonathan Owens, is that this word is also confirmed by the grammar of Middle Egyptian and Zande, for example. So what we're seeing here, and this is from I translated this from the French into English on pages 295 and 296. That word peret, meaning cake, it is suffixed by T that I have bolded in red here, right? So notice all the words right here, they're all suffixed with the morpheme T. Coming from the parent language, the T suffix in the Zande language has been dropped, but it manifests itself as a vowel, this A at the end of the word. So where Middle Egyptian has T, the Zande language realizes the T as A, which we can see here. So let's look at the second line first. So we had this word biet, block of stone. In Zande, mbia, stone. You see the A there. Beret, bush. In the Zande language, we reconstruct bira because this that we have highlighted here is the result of what we call progressive assimilation. So this is moving closer to the previous sound, so it gives it now this shape. And it's the same thing happened with this word here in Middle Egyptian, with Jeret, decree, and Zande, indike, decree. Weret, road, Zande, gine, road. Same thing that we see here, progressive assimilation on the final vowel. Demet, knife, dua, axe, and note that M corresponds with W. In Zande, Middle Egyptian M corresponds to Zande W at times in the Zande language. Then we have Hemet, woman, and then we have Zande Wa, woman. The dotted H often disappears in the Zande language. And so again, the M corresponds with W. So we see that this is dropped. And thus we're just left with the second syllable, which is Wa. And of course, the so-called feminine T realized as the final A. And we can prove that dotted H disappears when we look at this final word right here, Rehet, field, and Zande, ara, field. So remember, we already did the verification that the nasal lines of Vular Trill that you see in this blue corresponds to Zande R. Right? You see him in all the words here. And so when we come back here, it's no surprise. And so this nasal lines of Vular Trill is going to correspond to Zande R. So we know this is legit. And again, the dotted H disappears in Zande. So that's why it's missing from the word Hemet, meaning woman, and also in this word Rehet, meaning field. Right? And we can see in Chiluba, Jibesa, the word meaning forest, which would correspond to this word Beret, meaning bush. Because remember that in Egypt, they no longer had forests. So now the word has shifted to mean the bush, but it maintains in the forest zone the word for forest here, right? So with that said, this further proves the correspondence between the Zande word for egg and the Middle Egyptian word peret, meaning cake, because it meets the sound correspondence test and it meets the morphological test that we just did right now. And so now the question becomes, well, how the hell does the word for egg and the word for cake, correspond? And we've already made that assessment in terms of the circularity correspondence here, but now we're going to go through the process of proving it. And so what we're finding here is that the Zande language actually keeps the original form of the word, that this idea of cake is a derivative of this word for egg, but not in the sense that, you think of. And so what we're arguing here is that there was an original word egg that came to mean two semantic things, having to deal with primordialness, the beginning of something, as an egg is the beginning of the life of a chicken, for example. And so it went in one direction along the lines of primordialness, of beginnings, and the primordial deities. And then it also went in the semantic path of the shape, the ovoid and circular shape here. So this is why you see this word per, form, shape, original state, primal state of being, and it has this circular determinative to here. So I made kind of a little semantic chart here. So based upon what we've seen in the previous, we have, from egg, we have round, circle, and then the round and circleness, of course, pancake, round cake. And then this word becomes the general word for food and offerings, right? And then also ball of cone, incense, turtle shell, skull, and then from these potsherds, because potsherds look like fragments of his skull. If you ever seen a skull in person, you'll see these kind of like, rigid kind of shapes, in terms of the shell of the skull. And so this is where you get potsherds from, right? And flakes, because it comes from the notion of the skull. But the skull got its name, from the egg, in terms of it being a protective shell. And so that's the same thing with the turtle shell. So this is something that Capo-Chichi has, and this is based on experience and having conversations with him, and even seeing, the exchanges between him and uh, Jean-Claude Mboli. Capo-Chichi has a hard time understanding the evolution of words and this phenomena called a semantic field, and how words that seemingly don't seem to go together, may derive from an ancestral form that goes into different semantic trajectories and paths, right? And we're seeing that here with this concept of egg. It was the egg, the Zande keeps the original form of the word egg, which became the word for cake in ancient Egyptian, right? And so in this slide here, I give an example of the isiZulu language. Their word for egg, it is ikanda, if I'm saying that correctly. And due to colonialism and interactions with Europeans, they introduce the concept of zero to the Amazulu. And instead of borrowing the word zero from the the Dutch or the English, so to speak, they instead use their word for egg to represent zero, because an egg has the same shape as the number zero, which you can see right here. So you're seeing how this concept of zero has nothing to do with eggs as we understand it in terms of their substance and function. But because of the shape of the egg, the same word for egg is now used for the concept of zero, meaning empty, right? So if you can understand that, you can see how the word for egg, which survives as the word for egg in Sango, Zande, and the Somali language, ends up in ancient Egyptian as the word for cake and pancake and flatbreads, right? Now, this word here that he had for eggplant and egg in Coptic is incorrect. And, so this should have been removed from the data set. But because out of the 6 languages that Jean-Claude Mboli examined, the removing of this particular entry would not at all affect the argument that he made here, because it's sound. Because again, we have 1, 2, 3, 4 correspondences here out of 6. And they're all based on regular sound meaning correspondences, which we see here, right? So if you can understand that, then you can understand how the word for egg, can come to mean other things. So we're dealing with a diachronic analysis here, not a synchronic. The word for, when you think of a cake, it is not the same thing as an egg synchronically. Diachronically, they are the same because the underlying meaning has to deal with the shape of these things, right? So even even in the Dogon language, the concept of the egg is seen to represent the beginning and primordialness. So this is the book The Pale Fox by um, M. Griot and Germain Derchelin, if I'm saying that correctly, and it's Marcel Griot. Uh, and in it, you can see, one of the drawings, the egg of the world, right, from which Amma emerged, which it would be equivalent to Amen in the ancient Egyptian lore. And so you can see from the scan of the book, this egg representation here is the first 7 vibrations of the egg of the world. States clearly that this is an egg. And then the second one here is the prefiguration of man in the egg of the world. So this is a abstract symbolization of man and his evolutionary spin, kind of like what you can see here in 2D. They're trying to convey the idea of motion and expansion in a circular way, kind of like the Dekinga in the Congo tradition. And so this is Amma and of course man, and man is just a microcosm representation of Amma, the deity itself, right? And so it says here Bibile, which is a word for metamorphosis. This is the partial reduplication, and actually this word here is cognate with the word keper in ancient Egyptian, but that's another conversation. So the Bibile of the metamorphosis of the Po, which is the seed. And I have that highlighted in red for a reason, but on this page is 134 to 135. It talks about it is inside the pole, which is the symbol of the smallest, is an even smaller thing, which is life. Life developed at the same time as its means of support made of the blended elements. This development worked on the principle of a motion turning in a conical spiral, which you see here. It is said when life increases, it increases by whirling, which is a repetition of Amma's first act, because that imitates how Amma came out of the egg of the world, right? So again, this is how Amma, she came out by whirling in a spiral fashion like the wind, like a tornado, out of the egg, right? And so, there are many Dogon languages and dialects. And so it's kind of a misnomer to think of Dogon as, one static people. But there's different dialects and different groups of Dogon. So in some of those languages of Dogon, the word for egg is taru or talu, because there's an R and L dialectical interchange, right? So I just picked 2 out of many. But there are also some other dialects. For example, this Najamba Dogon language is Pongo or Pole, egg, Mambo, Pole, egg. And again, they keep the original form of the word here that was lost amongst the ancient Egyptian, but they kept the derivative form of the word. So that's how the word pole, egg, that you see here in the Dogon language became the word for form, shape, an original state, primal state, right? And we can prove this through sound correspondences. So remember that there's different dialects. Some have R in a second consonant position, and some have L, as you can see right here. So while these 2 particular dialects, the Najamba, have L, in the Jamse dialect, they will have R in a second consonant position for other correspondences. So we can see in Egyptian, The P and the nasalized vowel are trill, to fly, to flutter, to flap and flutter your wings. To fly here is in Dogon periwe, bird flap wings, thus to flutter. And it's also the same word meaning a dying animal to flop around. So a variant of this same root means pere, meaning to jump and leap. And but they have a different word in terms of the act of flying, but the same root is found in both of these terms, right? And then Peru or Pera or Pere, anything unseemly, and then we have Pere. And so when you see these two dots right here, this represents a after a vowel, it is to signify that the vowel is elongated. So Pere, nothing for nothing, simply with nothing special, right? Perech, to scratch, to scrape. And then we have poro or porowo, scrape off a layer of skin. Poro meaning to castrate by cutting off. Poru, castrated animal, right? So ultimately, as a word dealing with cutting and separating. And this has a ch suffix, and this one has a wa suffix. And we can see here that this we suffix, these are verbal suffixes on the root here. And then we have that word again, Peru, primal state of being. Peru, to have done something in the past. Peruti, primeval. And then, Perutiru would be the primeval gods. And so this would be oro, before, previously, in the past, long ago, in the old days, first and earliest, right? So, but in this form, they have the word for bread and cake as offering, but they have buru, where the P is a B sound. So I'm doing some other correspondences showing P corresponding also with B, but I just wanted to put that there just for referencing. So, we're going to continue this on thing. So it's safe to say that the Dogon still have the original form of the word for egg that became the word for primal state, because the primalness is in the egg. The beginnings, this becomes the symbol of that which was before. This is our original state, coming out of an egg. Now, whether they knew that women actually had eggs is to be debated, but they looked at nature, and they looked at alligators, and they looked at birds, and they looked at snakes, and they came to the same conclusion that we must come from an egg, that hatched in the womb, right? And so this is the beginning. This becomes now symbolic, because it starts a semantic path for beginnings and primordial and first. And so that's exactly how these terms came to be. So the word for primal state and the word for bread and cake have the same origin in the word for egg. So you see why it's important to do these linguistic studies, and why we have to establish the sound laws, because this is what allows for us to go back in time and to reconstruct these particular concepts, and to show from these humble beginnings, words for egg, for example, becomes words for skull, for turtle shell, for primal state of being, the past, the beginning, bread cakes, et cetera, that we saw earlier. So even in ancient Egypt, they had this primordial egg conversation. And so especially in the Hermopolis cosmology. And so it was called Wunu. This is where Hermopolis Magna, is in Middle Egypt. And it's also known as Kamenu, which is technically a variation of this very word that we see here. And Kamenu meaning the eight. And so, these 8 primordial gods, just like you had the 8 Nomo to emerge from the cosmic egg in the Dogon tradition, the same 8 in the Hermopolitan tradition you know, started that process of creation and the like, and they tell you that it comes from an egg. And in some of the traditions, it is Jehuti in the form of the ibis bird that lays the cosmic egg from which creation emerged from, right? And this Jehuti in relationship to eggs is going to be very important later on in our conversation. So we're going to continue with the critique. Middle Egyptian. So the original Raymond Faulkner text is handwritten, and it may be hard to read his handwriting. So this author here, Boris Jagorovic, modernized Faulkner's original Middle Egyptian dictionary, and so he put it in computerized form. So we just screenshot from the computerized form, and we can see this word perut here. Again, we see that this is primeval time, and then some will say pauti, which is paruti, primeval gods, right? And you can see the determinative of the circle here in terms of the primeval time. So because you can write the word pauti with this word, this circle here, this circle must also be pronounced with the P and the nasalized of volar trio that you see here, right? And then you can see here is written twice, right, for the gods. But these, so it's proving that at least the circle, the concept of a circle, can be written. Was articulated with this PR or this P nasalized volar trio, a type of R sound consonant sequence, right? And we can go into Chiluba to further prove this, because what is for Middle Egyptian, what is P nasalized volar trio is KL in the Chiluba Bantu language consonant sequence. So we have this original word here, pa, form, shape, original state, corresponds to kela, to instruct, to educate, to train. Now, I know, y'all going to be like, that doesn't even seem similar. How do they relate? Note that this is a noun. This form here is a noun. So this is not to form. It is form, already formed, right? Shape, which we know is an oval shape, right? But to form, to shape is the verbal form. This is how, normally you would add an I behind it. And so this concept of to form or to shape also has a derivative meaning in terms of to instruct, to educate. And for example, even in French, when you say former, meaning to form, it also means to train, to make, to develop, to shape, to mold. So when you instruct, you educate, or you train, what you're saying is that you're shaping the young child, you're molding the young child into a particular form. That's where the connection goes. So in Chiluba, they just maintain the form in terms of education and training. Whereas in Middle Egyptian, they stick to the concept of forming and shaping, and not necessarily in terms of education. But that same consonant sequence, is Kulu in Chiluba, primordial, principal, supreme, ancient, old. And we know that because the word also means to raise, to grow someone. And that's, and that concept of growing, expanding also means to be old. And again, it would make sense if you're talking about coming from a duck, a bird, for example, a egg stage, going all the way to the full-fledged bird stage. It's a process of growing, expanding, and shaping. And then, of course, we have this word here, perut, offerings, cakes, loaves, and that same consonant sequence, jikele or jikela, meaning egg. So Chiluba, just like the Dogon, has both forms, the word for egg in the same consonant sequence and the word for primordial, principle, supreme, old, first, beginnings. It's not a coincidence. Both Chiluba, Dogon, Zande, and in Shango, and even Somali, and all have both forms, either egg or cake, primordial and primordial ancient. So since they inherited both forms of these words in these different ways, we know for a fact that this word perut, offerings, cakes, is in fact a derivative of a more ancient word that the ancient Egyptians lost, and that is the word for egg, right? So now we're going to get on the mistakes that Mboli made in his arguments. So for some reason, people think that just because Mboli says something in the text, that either I or members of my research team, that we just agree with everything that he says. We don't. And we have brought issues to Mboli several times, and certain critiques I've made, even in writing, of certain conclusions of his, you know. And what I always reemphasize is that Mboli is a pioneer in this particular work, because no one has really done what he's done when it comes to African languages and trying to establish an African language family. So there's, just like all pioneers like Diop and Obinga, they're going to get certain things not correct, but they set the foundation, they set the practice and the methods that will allow us to clean that up eventually, as more sources become available and the like, and that we can perfect it. And so there was a few mistakes made by Mboli, and we're going to discuss them now. So when viewing, the first mistake is when viewing the the word pat or peret in the Faulkner dictionary. Mboli interpreted this determinative to be an egg. And this is not an egg, this is a loaf of bread. And so when we go into the actual, this is a screenshot of Faulkner. So remember, I told you that Faulkner, he hand wrote in cursive the entire dictionary, right? So this is what you see here. So this is the word, peret, meaning cake or loaf, used in offerings, and it says as general terms for offerings. And then he gives one example here. And then this DETS is a shorthand for determinatives. So he's showing here these two hieroglyphs and a determinant. So I try to enlarge it here so you can see it's a circle. So when we go back, we can see that, if he was to interpret this as an egg, this sign should have been tilted to the left, which you see here. So the sign that is in Faulkner, this one right here, is actually this X3 sign. But the one that is used for egg is the H8. And these are Gardner signals. But when we pay attention, really, when we take a close look at this, the H8 hieroglyph and the X3 hieroglyph are the exact same hieroglyph. So pay close attention. The H8 hieroglyph that is tilted to the left is the exact same hieroglyph as X3. They're just in a different, slightly different orientation. And what's interesting is I have at the bottom of the screen here the sound meanings that these symbols, are used, that are associated with these symbols. So note for your own records that in ancient Egypt, the determinative symbols may be pronounced differently. This is one of the reasons why we have what is called a phonetic complement. So let's look at this second line here. If you can see my mouse, let's look at the second line here. So this hieroglyph here, this square, represents the P sound. This hieroglyph of the duck with his arms open is represents the consonant sequence P and the nasal lines of Ular Trill that we see here, that we have transliterated represented like this. This vulture symbol here is a single, it only represents a single consonant, and that's the nasal lines of Ular Trill, which we see in the second part right here, right? And then we have the double reed leaf, which is Y and T, and then this is a determinative. It's just a wooden branch. So it represents the concept of thing, right? So why, if this sign here, the second sign, is duck, can represent the consonants, two consonants in sequence, the P and the nasal lines of Ular Trill, why do we have the P in the single and the nasal lines of Ular Trill here? Because it helps to reinforce exactly which pronunciation of the sign we are reading here, right? So you don't pronounce this twice. You don't say, paperiri is still, pereit for lock on door. But this is what we call a phonetic complement. It complements the phonetic, the phonemes of this particular original sign. So that's why you see, for example, this, let's go with H8 right here, right? Why this is represented as merut. It is also represented as ser, and also sewahit. The word sewahit, this one right here that I have in the colors, is the basic word for egg. But this word for bread loaf, X3, is jehuti, yit, and t. Because, yit and t are just words for bread. But notice, a variation of the X3 is the X2. So which is supposed to be this loaf of bread in a cup, or a kind of bowl. So that's what this is. So it's the same, they're pronounced the same. So, but notice, so what I noticed in the last video and why I had to do it over here is that this word jehuti for bread and this word suwahit for egg. And when I looked at them closely, knowing what I know in terms of the interdialectical correspondences, I made the argument that really these two are the same word. They're just different dialects and languages. And so, especially when it comes to this dotted H, words that you will see with dotted HM and dotted HW, you'll also see in a syllabic reverse. The W or the M will come first. So it would be W dotted H. M dotted H. And this J will also correspond to S in the first consonant position, right? So let's prove it, right? And so remember, this is the word Jehuti or Tho in the New Kingdom. So this is one of the ways to spell it. So remember this sign that we see here, Jehuti, that's Y. This is X2. So we go back here, this is X2, Jehuti. Right? And so here's the X3. This is Jehuti as well, the so-called loaf of bread. You can see I just put some signs here, these various bread symbols. So see this one here, you see this one. They all have this peculiar shape. This is just a bowl that you would see, like that you see in this symbol here, right? That the bread loaf is just sitting in. So here's another bowl, bread loaf, another bowl, the bread loaf is smaller. So just different variations to bread loaf in the shapes, all oval, circular type shapes, right? So, but this is Jehuti in a new kingdom. And so notice that these bread loaves really kind of look like the Dogon egg of the world from which Amma emerged from. So we're seeing how the word for bread and the word for egg are coming together because they have similar shapes. And they're referencing these particular shapes. But let's do the sound correspondences first. So I told you that the ancient Egyptian S often corresponds with the J sound in the first consonant position. So I have these correspondences for you here. And there are also some internal correspondences with these other consonants. For example, the in this last consonant position is W for separation point. W also corresponds with B and M. Both B, M, F, and M. I said M already. So B, M, F can all turn into W in ancient Egyptian, and they correspond. So, like we have this word here, serefet, warm bread, janebe, pastry, seneb, to burn, seren, because the nasal lines of ular trill becomes fully nasal and becomes in. And so these sounds interchange. So to burn and to burn up. Remember, I said the B and M's also correspond with each other, right? And so in this dialect, jeref, the B becomes F. And so we had this word here, serer, need, and jerer, need. Sefer, a cut of meat, and jefer, food, right? These are all different dialects. So this is why we have to, do these experiments so we know the sound correspondences. So when we go back and we see Jehuti in one dialect and we have Suhit in another dialect, we know that these are in fact the same. And so that word, the root hu means food, right? But its reverse is waher in the word for crop. And then this word waher meaning fishermen and fowlers, because this is food. It's just a word for food. Waher provisions, wahat supplies, provisions, right? And so the WH is in this word sawahet, meaning egg. And notice that this word sewahet also means inner coffin, because now the word for egg, which becomes the word for food, or is equivalent for the general word for food, now it becomes like when you put someone in a coffin, it's like you're putting them back in the egg. And there's probably some mythological association with it as well, because when you die here, you're being reborn in the spiritual world. So the inner coffin was probably the egg. They're putting the body in the coffin, but you're really putting their spirit back into the egg to be reborn on the other side. And we know that is for a fact because you can see at the end of the word here, what do you see? The egg. So we know that the word for egg and inner coffin are the same. So the word inner coffin is a derivative from the word for egg, right? And so note that, again, I told you the word for egg can come to mean other words. So for example, or other words can come to mean egg in this case. So let's look at this word here, shater, meaning to hidden or to hide or to make secret. And when it's suffixed by T for abstracts, now it means egg, because eggs hide the embryo, right? And then we have this word Jehuti. That's a word, it's so-called the symbol for bread, but the symbol for bread and the symbol for egg are the exact same symbol. They just tilted. So you can tell this is further proof that there's different dialects in Old and Middle Kingdom, and there's different languages being spoken here. Because these types of correspondences had to happen way before the pre-dynastic times. Right? That's why you have so many different words for the same object, because these are spoken by different languages in the spoken by people who spoke different languages along the Nile in ancient times, right? So now, Mboli mistake number 2. So now we're going to get on the whole eggplant thing, right? So this is what he said about. Remember what he said about the eggplant. So that the Coptic word pate, eggplant, is related to Middle Egyptian peret, egg. I already stated that this is false. Mboli, he wasn't thorough enough on this word here, and he got this incorrect. It's totally wrong, right? So when you go, for example, to the TLA for the Coptic language, right? You have this word, paete, pete, right, or impete, for those who read Coptic, right? And it's the word for eggplant. But you see what it says right here? It says Arabisch Lenwort. In other words, an Arabic loan word. So this is a recent loan word into the Coptic language. It's not an old word at all. The Egyptian language has no word for eggplant. That was a crop that was introduced later in history to the Egyptians in North Africa. And so in Arabic, you would say Bathinajan and Betinajan, eggplant. But even in Arabic, it's a loan word from Persia, from Badinjan. Now, the question is, given that the Persians introduced this to Arabic, and this is supposed to be an Arabic loan word, what did the Copts do to the word Njan? Because if they would have borrowed it directly from Arabic, they would have borrowed the Njan too. They would have no need to just drop that randomly, especially since they borrowed it from the Persians, Badinjan, right? So, but this is definitely a loan word, and it should not have been counted in Mboli's correspondence set. And so his whole breakdown of the word, Paetai, trying to make it Egyptian and find it in Coptic, that's false. It's not even an Egyptian, it's not even an African word, right? So, and Mboli mistake number 3. So he goes on in a second part of the conversation. So he says, Mboli rightly notes that the word for mankind, actually originally patricins, is written with the sign of the egg. Because remember, the word for patricin, or humankind, associated with the word for egg, corresponds to what we see in the Dogon, because the prefiguring of man in the egg of the world, there's a religious and mythological and cosmological association between the concept of the egg and the human being, right? And so we witnessed that in the Dogon, and we witnessed that in ancient Egypt as well. So more problematic is when he claims, talking about Mboli, that this proves that the egg sign can be read as either Pa or Pa. I would say on this point that Mboli should have said in maybe in pre-dynastic times, but there's no proof to my knowledge that you can read the sign for egg as such, although the circular or the oval shape itself is definitely represented by that consonant sequence, as we proved earlier. This reasoning is incorrect, that it is based on the false premise that Pawut or parut, cake, pancake, flatbread, can be found written with the sign of the egg. Because remember, Mboli made that mistake. That was his first mistake. Uh, interpreting in Faulkner this to be the egg symbol, which is this here. But as we just discovered, the egg and the bread symbol are the exact same symbol. So it's not necessarily either a representation of an egg or a representation of bread. It's just a shape. It is a form. It's just a word for form and shape. So it's giving you a particular type of shape. That's why the word for shape and form has this circle. So they're telling you anything with an ovoid shape is par. That's why Mboli is not all the way wrong when he says that you can read the egg symbol as par. Because anything that has that shape is called par, because it derives ultimately from an egg. So anything that has an egg, ovoid, circular type shape is called the word for egg, just like what we saw amongst the Amazulu in the isiZulu language, ikanda, egg, for the word zero, because the number zero, the actual symbol for the word zero, is in an ovoid shape. And because it is in this ovoid shape, we use the same word egg to represent the concept of zero. And so just like in ancient Egyptian, that same circle, because it has this particular shape, is called ped. And it originally comes from an egg. It can represent bread. It can represent anything, a skull, a head skull, because a skull head is this shape as well. Anything that has this shape is going to be called ped. Right? So here we go. So Capo-Chichi is incorrect on that part. Another argument invalidating this claim is the lack of free alternation between this symbol here, which is supposed to represent like almost a glottalized or a glottofricative symbol, and the nasalized of volar trill during the Old, Middle, and New Kingdom periods of ancient Egypt. Yet another argument for this lack of alternation is that in the Ramesseum Onomasticon, a kind of encyclopedia from the New Kingdom, peret and pot are clearly distinguished as two different kinds of breads and cakes. And so so these are some other arguments that we're going to address later. So we're only addressing this one, this paragraph, because it's in continuance of the other paragraph that we screenshotted earlier. So what Mboli should have done, and this is just a bigger screenshot of what I just read. So what Mboli should have done is made some other correspondences, not only with this word here and this word here, both meaning cake. And so this is the actual commentary from Mboli's text, pages 143 and 144 on this issue. Because again, anytime that we're critiquing anybody, we always cite them directly. And so what Mboli actually says, it says that the Middle Egyptian suffix T, having here a collective value, note the three features of the plural under the determinatives of man and woman. We can identify a term, pa, human being. The egg sign, which Capo-Chichi admits is there, H8, that we saw earlier, confirms the pa and pa reading. Sir Alan Gardner thinks that this sign is perhaps related to another older sign that would describe a clod of earth. What is the relationship with humanity if not at the level of sounds only? But here again, the Zande explains the situation perfectly. There is indeed a Zande word para, which means precisely land near a river. Those who are familiar with Egyptian mythology immediately perceive the link between mound, land near a river, egg, and primordial times. because of the process called paronymy, and all of these different words start with per, as written like this. In the beginning was the Nun, and the primordial water in withdrawing revealed the first earthly mound, Pa, on which the world will develop and organize itself. The primordial egg represents the beginning of this world in gestation. Cites Obenga. The Coptic term beak, boundary of land, confirms the meaning of the Zande term para, land near a river. Right. So I haven't read the thing. So what Mboli should have done, because this is the only example he gives in the book of this, glottofricative sign corresponding to the nasalized velar trill sign in the second consonant position. And so what I did is I expanded and give the proof of that correlation. So, you have this word here, bad, because this corresponds to D, and D corresponds to R and L. So this is why these, signs interchange or correspond to each other. But we can clearly see here, this word here, bach, fruit, seed, grain, and then this reduplication, berit, seed, grain, cereal, right? Then we have this other word here, nadu, meaning snake, writhing, and then we have naru, snake, right? So remember our axiom. One example is an accident. Two examples is a coincidence. Three examples is a pattern. And so you always, that's why I said earlier, you always want to start with three so that, we can eliminate it as chance. So we have three examples here. This word for, these words for cake, right? Both this and this words for cake. And so it's the Capo-Chichi mentions the Ramesseum onomasticon, giving the implication that it was, two different types of cakes. I really didn't find that, but let's just assume that that is in fact the case. It may not be like so drastically different in terms of the cakes. It's probably kind of like the word cookie in English. So when we think of a cookie in modern time, we think of something that is, more crunchier. In most instances, you do have soft cookies, but the word cookie itself is a diminutive of the word cake. The word cookie and the word cake are the exact same word. A cookie is just a small cake. They're both sweet pastries. One is just generally smaller than the other, right? So if you was just to look at the word cake and cookie and just only keep the vowels, they would look the same in terms of the consonants, cookie and cake. But in the modern imagination, we kind of think of them differently, but they're ultimately the same. And it could be the case here when it comes to peret, meaning cake, and pajet, meaning cake, right? But I also want to note that there is a paret, meaning a fruit or a cereal. And, this cake could be a kind of cake made from a particular type of fruit or cereal, or it could be the reverse. So that's always a possibility that you would have to enter into the conversation. But notice here's the word paret, and it has as its determinative an egg, and also the circle, and also this, which is supposed to be land, but I see a whole bunch of words for cake and bread that is also has this determinative here. So this further lets me know that many of the symbols are not really symbols of anything in particular. They're just different types of shapes. So any kind of bread or any kind of land formation or any kind of object that has, you know, any of these particular shapes, then that word will be determined by the shape, because that's all it's representing, a shape, right? And we should note that this symbol here that is in the word, parazit, pachazit, if you want to pronounce it like that, this symbol here interchanges with Z, but it also interchanges with D in Middle Egyptian. And I cite the source material and I give examples in the upcoming text. And so you notice that we have this word here, piz, a kind of bread, pizin, a kind of bread, pis, a kind of bread, and payit, a kind of bread, because this J, which is representative of a semi-vowel, interchanges with the nasal eyes of volar trill and even W at times, right? So, we can see over time by probably the onslaught of vowels how these different sounds may come in and change over time. But these are all the same word, but because there was probably different prefixes and suffixes, like we see this in suffix here, and in different types of, or the quality of vowels in between these second consonants, that they forced a particular type of sound change. And that's why we have these different variations of the same word for bread and cakes, right? So we gotta keep that in mind. And so to summarize, our discussion here, I state that in Mboli's correspondences relating Middle Egyptian perit cake, pancake to Zande, Somali, and Songo terms meaning egg is sound. And the Zande, Somali, and Songo languages, as well as the Dogon, as well as the Chiluba Bantu language, maintain the original word egg. And the Egyptians evolved the word into what became, word for bread and cakes in the language. However, Jean-Claude Mboli's correlation of said terms to Coptic pate is incorrect, as this is a recent borrowing from Semitic, which itself is a borrowing from Persian. And so, lastly, this study highlights the importance in order to be able to come to these conclusions, he would have had to do a full study on each one of the so-called critiques that he was given. And as this series progresses, you'll see more and more that there's some things he got correct, but there's other things he got wrong because he just didn't do the work. And he didn't understand the language in that kind of depth. So I'll end there. I'll stop sharing my screen. And so I haven't kept up with the comments, and so I'm not seeing really any kind of comments or anything to that nature. So I will leave it open. I'll give it until 5 o'clock. If there are any questions, or comments, I will address them, now. And I know there's going to be a time delay, so I'll just wait a little bit. But I do see one. Well, I'll say this one first. It says, Gigi says, thanks for the mystic of bread, indeed. And D. John says, Asar, I think you said in another video that Indo-European languages is also somehow related to African languages. I start to see why. Yes, and there are several scholars who have looked into this, and they have their own kind of theories built around it, but it's clear that Indo-European has a historical relationship to African languages. But they, Indo-European, to my knowledge, was not born in Africa per se. but the African languages were involved in this development. And peace to Kofi Campbell. He says hand, purple, blue, peace. Don't know what that means, but peace and blessings to you. Peace and blessings to Malamu Ra X and Zugichi and Tony M. Peace and blessings to you. And Bwana Hakaziki. What's up, Asar? Working through it again, as always. And Geoff Taharka is in the building. Peace to you, contrarian thinker. And I think everybody else after that. Nope. Didn't shout out Brother Robert Rand, who's also in the building. Thank you for joining. And Omar Reed and Ali Bernard. So just want to give a shout out to y'all in the chat. And I know this was, more kind of technical, but these are the kinds of things. So as we're going to see in the upcoming conversations, that you should never try to weaponize someone else's critique of another person's argument unless they fully worked it out and you can see how they did it, and you yourself are competent in the subject enough to be able to evaluate the critique. And so this is something that a lot of folks have tried to do in this community. And when we look at a lot of these critiques a lot closer, they don't seem to hold as much weight. And so this is just one example. So again, this is going to be an ongoing series, because some will be longer or shorter than others, depending on the nature of the statement being made. And so we'll be revealing those as time moves forward. And Mott says, how sound is the methodology used by GJK Campbell? And I'm assuming you're meaning Dr. GJK Campbell Dunn. And I would say that GJK Campbell Dunn is good for having source material on the different languages that he uses to compare. However, he is of the Greenberg school, so he uses mass comparison. He doesn't do the historical comparative method. And if your goal is to establish the relatedness between languages and populations by their language, then using Campbell Dunn without any kind of background in historical comparative linguistics is going to kind of lead you astray. And so, I would only recommend GJK Campbell Dunn if you are familiar with how to do and utilize historical comparative linguistics, and more specifically the comparative method, because then you can use his raw data and then conduct your own experiments using the comparative method. And that's how I utilize him now. So when I first started, because I started off in the Greenberg School, my university professors were former students and for example, Christopher Ehret, and he was their research advisor for the PhDs, and Campbell Dunn comes from that school of Greenbergian thought, like Christopher Ehret. And so in my earliest works, you would see me use him heavily, but I don't utilize him in that way. It's just like if you're using Budge's work, if you don't have a background in terms of the modern studies of the Egyptian language itself and the writing script, then I wouldn't recommend using Budge for your studies, because there's certain issues that you have to be aware of using Budge's dictionary more specifically. But it's the same with GJK Campbell Dunn, in my opinion. Right? And everything is in the building. Peace and blessings to you. as well as simply saved. So I don't know if I was just clear. Did everybody understand the nature of the argument and what was said? If so, let me know in the comments. And I guess since there's no questions, I will end the program soon. But I do see this one question, and it's from Kansu Ifagbamila Nyame Re. And he says, what's the best dictionary? I'm assuming you're talking about the ancient Egyptian dictionaries. And your best bet is to be familiar with the online TLA dictionary. And let me just share my screen. I'm probably already logged in, which I am. Let me do this. Let me share my screen so y'all can kind of see what I'm talking about here. So this is the Thesaurus Lingua Egyptiae, right? And so this is the home screen. So this is the link at the top right there that you kind of see. So it's aaew.bbaw.de. So this is and so it's all in German for the most part. But when you do a search, you can search in English, right? So if I put bread and I do a search here, then it pulls up a list of words, right? Meaning bread, a loaf of bread shaped like a cow's head, right? But some words are not going to be translated into English, and they do that on purpose because they want to show you which words are found in demotic. So, like when you see this die Flogenden, I don't know what that is. So what I do is I go into Google Translate, and that let me know it says the flies or the flying. It should be better translated. So birds, basically the flying ones, like you see here. So literally birds. So you see it's the same word. So we do have this one English translation. So this is a good start. And so what you see in the last part where it says WB, that's for the Ermine and Grappal Waterbush. Like this one is book 1, pages 492, section 3, because there's these little, it's broken down into sections on the page, and then 493, right? And then these are other abbreviations for dictionaries and source material that you would just have to find out by looking on the website. And I forgot where you go to discover the list. What page was that? Is it text? Let me go home. What is it? Introduction. Bam, right. So if you go to the introduction link, you're going to pull up and see this page. And when you click on the help, it's not going to show it because for some reason it pops up in another window. So let me do this. I'm going to stop sharing that screen, and then I'm going to share the this screen here, right? So this is what pops up when you hit that help link on the introduction page. And then you're going to go to this where it says bibliographical abbreviations. And it's going to give you the list of all the text that the online dictionary has pulled up. That the online dictionary, the TLA that we were just at, all the source material, right, and their abbreviations. So when you see some abbreviation as Spencer, Egyptian Temple with Spencer Patricia, The Egyptian Temple, a Lexicographical Study in London, 1984. Right, so it's a good bibliography for that, but it should be known that even though it has all these textual sources, it doesn't have everything. It's a large database, but it is not a fully complete database. And so what is, in terms of physical dictionaries, what they're doing now is they're starting to create dictionaries for each time period. So there's a dictionary for Old Kingdom Egyptian, a dictionary, is a whole bunch of dictionaries for Middle Egyptian, dictionaries for the New Kingdom period. There's a dictionary for the Demotic period, and of course, there's a Coptic dictionary, right? And there's new discoveries, new forms of words that are being discovered all the time. So it's best to get those fragmented um, those fragmented dictionaries, because uh, the uh, how should I say? Because they help you to figure out which words existed and which forms existed at what periods. But the online TLA, can help you out as well. So like if I just put in the word hotep, right? And I just go to the first entry where it says offering table, and allows me to search, and it'll tell me, what period that you find this form in. So this is Old Kingdom, Old Kingdom, Old Kingdom, and it give you the source material and the text there. And let's go to the last one. So the last one's, it says New Kingdom, right? New Kingdom, NK. When you see this one where it says PTOL, that's the Ptolemaic period, right? And so this is saying a Ptolemaic Roman period. So, you can, this kind of helps you out in terms of showing you what time period and what forms that you see them, because you can often see the hieroglyphs as well. But it doesn't have all, like some entries that you put in, it won't have this information, because they're just citing it directly from a dictionary or some other kind of written source. So they may not at this particular stage of development know exactly where that word is in any particular Egyptian text. So, but this is a good source to start with. So there really is no best dictionary, so to speak. My thing is to get all of them, because there's certain materials that is going to exist in, because remember, the ancient Egyptian language existed in writing for over 2,000-3,000 years. And so there's form of words that are not in certain dictionaries. You're only going to get them in certain works, certain literature in terms of transliterations and all that. And then others will there exist in other languages. So you got to be familiar with German language and French language and Italian, for example, and especially Russian, right? Like they have dictionaries and they have forms of words that are rare forms that you won't see in these other dictionaries. So, so just keep that in mind. But that's where I would start. Let me see. Let me go back up. And Sean P said, yes, it was clear. Everything respected, yes. And yep, he said the Egyptian thesaurus, and you're welcome. He says more like the flying ones, yep. And Imani, I've heard a scholar stipulating that Proto-Indo-European has a non-European substratum. What could this mean precisely? Let me just give you the theory that both I and Jean-Claude Mboli have independently discovered and embraced. So before Jean-Claude Mboli, Again, I was familiar with Dr. G.J.K. Campbell Dunn. And so he had written some texts in the 2000s, the early 2000s, dealing with Indo-European and Niger-Congo. So he still believes in Niger-Congo, Afro-Asiatic, Khoisan, and all that, right? And he was talking about how these languages, these speech communities, left Africa, and then somewhere in the Caucasus, the Indo-European languages formed. And so what Mboli and I have been able to argue is that it's really a case of these African speakers who came sometime during the 4th millennium BCE, who came into the Levant, and others moved further north into Turkey, and then of course the Caspian. And it's the interactions of some language group and language family with what we call the Negro Egyptian, or what I call China, into language speakers, and their convergence and interactions is what gives birth to Proto-Indo-European. The same thing happens with the Semitic languages. That is this interaction between Negro Egyptian speakers and some native speakers who, is so far back in time that we don't know what languages they spoke, and the like. But their interactions and these either creolizations, convergences processes is what develops Semitic and Indo-European. And matter of fact, this is a book that in Jean-Claude Mboli's 2010 book, he entertained that at the last part of his entire work. But now the second book that is going to come out either next year or the year after, he solely deals with the question of Indo-European and Semitic. And so, he did an initial analysis, and of course, where there's smoke, there's fire. And so now that gave him the onus to look at it more deeply and more strictly. And so that is the nature of the upcoming text. And I argue that the Sumerian language is the evidence of the interactions of these Negro Egyptian speakers who left Africa, going into the Levant, going into Turkey and Mesopotamia. And so the Sumerian is the last of these Negro Egyptian languages that existed at that particular time. So that's a different conversation for a different time. Peace and blessings, Zane Montego. Thank you for joining, and you're welcome. And Brother Kansu and Firelight and Tisk. He says, could it be said that there are slang words that the common people use in everyday life that are just lost to oblivion over the thousands of years the languages existed, sort of like slang today? I wouldn't limit it to slang. It's just word, because this is what you have to understand about ancient Kemet. There were many languages spoken on the entirety of the Nile, going from the Delta all the way into Nubia. Probably dozens upon dozens of languages. And so the ruling class languages at any different period, represent a particular dialect of a language continuum, of different groups of people. And so there are words, there are entire languages that weren't recorded then. So this is the language that we are familiar with in terms of the ancient Egyptian, whether it's Old Kingdom, New Kingdom, Middle Kingdom, whatever, is the language of the ruling class. So it's no different than what happened in England. So if England did not have a writing system, we wouldn't know, let's just say that, England didn't have a British Empire. They did not adopt writing or anything to that nature. And, all we had was writings from the period in which French was the dominant language, which was the ruling class language of England, after the taking over of Normandy. French was the ruling class language, but that was not the language of the people on the ground. This is why we have so many French loan words in English to this date, because of that experience. And so when you're talking about the ancient Egyptians, the Old Kingdom, Middle Kingdom language may not have been the dominant language of the vast majority of the people who lived on the ground, in the communities. And I discussed that in the text Nesubiti, which I published in 2016, and I go into more detail in Ujima Volume 2, which came out in 2020. But we have to understand that backdrop to understand why you have different forms of words, of the same words, because it's different people from different speech communities who are doing what we call code switching, right? It's almost like, in some instances, it's almost like Spanglish. So if you ever been around like Spanish speaking people, especially like from Texas, they'll be speaking Spanish and then an English word will come in every now and then, and the English words, Spanish. It's like this interchanges, and so this is why, and they may have a word in Spanish that is genetically related to a word in English, but they would never know that, because they're two different branches, the Romance branch and the Germanic branch of Indo-European. But nonetheless, they're related, but they may have the same word that traces to Indo-European and may switch it up in their dialogue. So just imagine that being recorded on the walls. This is exactly what you see in ancient Egypt. And lastly, now that you mentioned Semitic, you said that these languages are not really part of the Chiana-Intu cosmos. Where do you group these languages? The language, Semitic languages are the result of a convergence process. And so by the strict criteria of what we mean by a genetic relationship, Semitic did not evolve naturally as a dialect from a proto-language out of Africa. It is its own Proto-Semitic is its own initial language, because it was a bunch of languages that over time were interacting, and it was borrowing, and it became a convergence type language, a creolization in many respects. And then so it starts its own branch. So it's semi part of the universe, because Chiana-Intu languages contributed majorly to the development of Semitic, but by the strict criteria to say that there's a Chiana-Intu and then just one branch came and then it evolved into Proto-Semitic and then it broke off after that, that's not the case. So does this relate to ancient Egyptian being a lingua franca? Exactly. And, it is my argument that ancient Egyptian, especially the Old and Middle Kingdom, was equivalent to Lingala in the Congo. Because Lingala, there was a language that existed some time ago, but it was drastically reduced as it became the lingua franca of that particular region. And that's more than likely what became the case with ancient Egyptian. And Mboli disagrees with that, but my findings, this is the position that I take. And this will be the last one. Is there any observation of any surviving slang words that are seen in a royal language or ruling language, but also seen used in a more common way among the public, like formal and informal? it's hard to say. I mean, there's words that are used in a punning fashion, but what was considered slang or not, we would have to uh we would have to have documentation of the formal language and then the informal language to make that distinction truly. There's words that you can say are used creatively in a particular way, but slang, I'm not sure if it would be proper to categorize it as such, certain terms, because you would, you know, it's all words are slang in the strictest sense. So if you have a formal uh, word, or we would, because it just depends on who's using it. So like if I'm using jargon, if I'm using a particular word in a scientific field, we would say that it's scientific jargon. But scientific jargon is really just slang for the scientific world, right? It's not something that we would formally use in another context. And so, it really just depends on how you want to word it. But I do appreciate each and every one of you for listening. And so I will keep you updated on future shows. And, remember to go to asarimhotep.com so you can pre-order your copy of uh, Race and Identity in Ancient Egypt, Volume 1, Towards an Etymology of the Place Named Kemet. Again, that's the address. And it is currently discounted, so get it at the discount price. And you will get a sample chapter. It's going to be released on August the 22nd. And so get it at the discounted price. And, I will continue, highlighting certain, aspects of the book or just subjects that are discussed in the book, as we continue and expand the content on this particular website. So I do appreciate each and every one of you. And so until next time, peace.